As a matter of fact, a good amount of our business is in the tourism. And that's basically because, hi, welcome. Basically because everything that happened here in Buffalo, the roots are here at Forest Lawn. Almost every famous person that had some kind of industry or the history of the building of Buffalo is buried here. And we have musicians, we have artists, we have entrepreneurs, we have all kinds of people. And of the 160,000 people that are buried here, everyone has a story. And that's the fascinating part, finding out everyone's story. So today we're going to go a little bit on symbolism. And what I'm going to do is just start a little bit with the history of Forest Lawn. And this guy right here, Charles Clark, was the gentleman that made it happen. Forest Lawn started in 1849, and there was a cemetery in Paris called Père Lachaise. And by the way, Père Lachaise is one of the top 10 tourist destinations in Paris, which I find interesting. But it was a cemetery that was built outside the city limits of Paris. And the whole idea was to create a cemetery that was not only a place to respectfully bury the dead, but was also a place where people could go and enjoy Mother Nature, get out of the craziness of the city. This cemetery was built 2 miles outside the city of Paris. Now it's within the city limits itself. But it was one of the first concepts of a movement that was called the Rural Cemetery Movement. That concept came here to the United States in the 1830s, and the very first one was Mount Auburn in Boston, Massachusetts. Now, Mr. Clark, who we met before, he was from Buffalo, he had family that lived in Boston. He went to visit them and heard about the cemetery they were building outside of Boston. And he said, this is a great idea for Buffalo, because in 1825, the Erie Canal was started, and the city was growing by leaps and bounds. Matter of fact, by the turn of the century, Buffalo was the 5th largest city in the United States with more millionaires per capita. It was a boom town. It was the gateway to the West. So he had a vision. So he came down Delaware Avenue, which was a dirt road at the time, and found this wonderful hilly piece of property. And it belonged to a farmer. And he was actually a land agent also, and his name was Charles Erastus Granger. And he farmed a lot of this land. Well, the hilly land he really couldn't do much with, so he was happy to get rid of it. And he sold 80 acres of his property to Mr. Clark for $150 an acre. And that was a lot of money back then. And then created the cemetery. He took another $10,000, put winding roads, and you will experience them. You all got a map, right? If you see on the map how the roads just sort of curve to create an outdoor, almost rural space. And so, and back at his time, all of the roads were named. It was like Laurel Lane, Crescent Circle, Rose Circle, all kinds of Lilac Place. They all had names that had to do with nature. And then Mr. Clark, he put the lawn under the forest and created Forest Lawn. So, like I said, we've been here since 1849. The third was Mount Hope in Rochester, New York. Again, part of the Rural Cemetery Movement, and then came Forest Lawn. Now, we're going to talk about symbolism, and when you see this, we all know what that means, right? What is that the symbol for? McDonald's, exactly. You don't need to see the name McDonald's, you just see those golden arches, and you know exactly what it means. There's another symbol. We know what that means, right? It's the peace sign. So that's the fun thing about being in the cemetery. You can walk these grounds, and hopefully when you're out here doing your assignment, you can look at some of the stones that are here, and some of the stones will actually tell you a story about the person that is laid to rest there, or the ornamentation on it might be able to tell you a little bit about somebody or the feelings the family who lay them to rest had about that particular person. In the late 1800s, Victoriana was big. The Victorian people used symbolism for everything. So that's where a lot of that culture came from. I had a book, and one of my docents was supposed to bring it back, and she didn't. But it's a great little reference book called Stories in Stone. And you can look up, like if you see a lily of the valley on a tombstone, you can look that up. And there's a couple great websites out there that have the symbolism too, which might help you along the way. That's our Delaware Avenue gate. There's symbolism even on our gate when you come in. You'll see the crown on the top, which means victory over death. And you'll see a lot of circles in a cemetery, which means the circle of life, no beginning, no end. And the arch itself, or the gate itself, is symbolic. It's a form of transition, of going from one place to another. So in other words, a soul is coming from the earthly plane to eternity when coming through that gate. And that's our Main Street gate that you probably see from Canisius all the time. And that was built in 1901 for the Pan American Exposition. I'm going to get right to the symbolism. Organizations, people were really proud of what they did in their lifetimes. And they would put their affiliations on their tombstones. For instance, this one is for people from the Ismailia, the Shriners Club. Come on, baby. I have to go do this. This one you'll see over and over and over again. This is the symbol for the Masons. It's the compass and the, let's see, the measure.
Square.
Square, thank you, for the letter G inside. And a lot of the time here in Buffalo, a lot of the people that were working on architecture or the printing presses all belonged to these organizations. And they were part of the Masons themselves. This one I find interesting. The 3 rings belongs to an organization called the Odd Fellows. And the 3 rings are faith, fortitude, and charity. And that was an organization that was formed back in the day. If someone was working and they got hurt in a job, there was nothing in place to really help the family or the person themselves get through it. And so this organization was formed to help people through times of need. And at the time, that wasn't a popular thing to do. And so these people were called Odd Fellows because it was a strange thing to do. That's how the organization got its name. This is one, a lot happened here on the grounds of Forest Lawn during the War of 1812. And to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the War of 1812, this is a plaque, and you'll find these quite often in the cemetery itself at sites where there are grave sites of those that fought during the War of 1812. And those were given by the Daughters of the American Revolution. So there's even a lot of war stuff. And this elk, you've probably seen him again at Main Street. That is a whole section for people that belong to the Benevolent Order of the Elks. So they own all of their property. Their members are buried behind, and that elk is a symbol. By the way, we just found out that there's a possibility this was done by Tiffany in Studios. So we're really excited to find out and have that authenticated. Do you know what that figure is? The circle with the cross underneath? What is that a universal symbol for? Like if you've ever gone to Europe or someplace and you've seen that symbol, like the ladies' room is a circle, and then the men's room is without it. And notice the 2 hands that are inside of that. The woman that's buried there, she started the Western New York chapter of the National Organization of Women. So you have that symbol for a woman, and her husband was a big supporter of it. And so the 2 hands were the symbol of how they work together for women's rights locally. I'll show you her epitaph in a little bit. And now we're going to get to religious symbols. And boy, there's a ton of them here. And I'm just scratching the surface with on one of them, any of them. Some are very, very noticeable. The cross is all over the place. And I'll show you a couple different types of crosses. You'll see the inscription inside, and I can't remember what it means now. Do you remember? It's a Latin term for Jesus Christ. Is that good enough? Okay, it's a good definition. This is from people of the Jewish faith. You'll see we have one whole Jewish section. A group of temples got together, bought a large parcel of land so people from their congregations could be laid to rest there. So obviously you see the Star of David. Also, when you're walking through that section, you'll see that on the top of many of the stones are the individual little rocks. And the family members, when they come to visit, they bring those and place them there as an outward sign that someone was there to remember them, to pay respect for them. And it goes back, a rock, nothing could happen. You've heard that term, solid as a rock. Well, that's sort of the concept. Their love will never, ever go away. And again, that outward sign. Another one of the Jewish faith is the menorah. You'll see that quite often too. I just found one in the Jewish section. It was a violin with a menorah next to it. And I found out this gentleman was one of the first chairs at the Philharmonic. So he brought his religion and his art. Angels are all over the place. Anybody want a project and want to count them for me? I'd appreciate it because we've tried a couple times and had no success whatsoever. And you'll notice this angel's holding a palm leaf. And we have angels. This one's made out of marble. We started using marble years ago. We soon found out that marble was not the best material, so we soon went to granite. And you'll see a lot of the marble pieces, which are very white in color. It's very hard. You can see how the detail in many of the figures themselves have sort of melted away just because of erosion and time. The granite ones, like here, are much more prevalent. I always wonder what secret this angel is keeping. And this is a cross that came off of a church that used to be on the corner of Delaware and West Utica. And there's an inscription inside of it that talks about this being one of the 4 crosses on top of St. Joseph's new cathedral, which was torn down in the 1970s. We also have a big bell up in the corner of the Delaware entrance that also came from that church that was brought here, that is rung every single time a funeral comes in to celebrate the life that was lived by the person that's being interred here. This is a really big, huge boat. This is called a Bolognese cross. Then, of course, we have the praying hands. They are all over the place. This one is done in bronze. It's interesting also to see the different types of materials that are used in memorialization. And now that I've been studying this more, I'm really getting to appreciate the workmanship of the craftsmen that did things 100 years ago, because they didn't have the tools that they have now to do things. And one little slip of a chisel, their work could literally be ruined in a matter of a stroke. And then bronze is used quite often, marble, granite, different colors of granite, which makes it interesting. This is called the Celtic cross, and the Celtic cross sort of is interesting because the design in it, you never can really tell where the design begins or ends. And there's quite a few of these in the cemetery that are interesting. Most of them have the cross in it with a circle behind it, which is almost like a halo, another religious interpretation. Here is one of the Holy Family, which I thought was interesting. This is one of the Infinite Cross. And notice on each side of the crosses are some rosaries. Even going back to the Egyptian time, an ankh. Actually, the Egyptians were the first to start memorialization. The those big tall things that are pointing to the sky that you'll see out here. Those I know. We have 712 obelisks. And they were the first to start memorialization. Usually a person, a war hero, or like a government official would be buried there with hopes that their spirit would go through that big shaft, through the pointed pyramid in the top straight to heaven. And a true obelisk is just one piece of stone. So when you go out there and you see the size of some of these, they're not blocks that are up there. This is one big piece of stone, and I marvel, how the heck did they get that up there? This is also called a handled cross. You can almost see where you would hold the top of it and use it. You'll see this in a lot of Egyptian designs. After they found King Tut's tomb, there was a surge of Egyptian design in cemeteries. So you'll see this quite often. Matter of fact, we have one guy here. He's right on the road, so you'll probably see him. He's near Rick James. The face on the Sphinx is said to be the face of the gentleman buried there, which I thought was interesting. And here's one of the 10 Commandments. Praise ye the Lord. You'll see a lot of scripture also. This one I just find really fascinating. I mean, this grieving person hanging onto the cross. It just talks about the sorrow and the grief. Again, we have another rosary. And then the Hail Mary. Again, the rosary there with the Blessed Mother. Then we have a lot of floral motifs, and every single flower has a meaning. Roses are probably the most prevalent here, but even the way the rose looks is symbolic. If you see a full open rose, that means someone lived a full life. But if you see like a rose bud, it probably means a young child was buried there. So that even the size of the rose bud, the rose flower, can make a difference. You have the papyrus leaves, lilies. You know, Easter time, we see the lilies all the time during the resurrection itself. The acanthus leaves, grapes, you know, the food of life, the wine representing the body and blood of Christ. Ivy's really big also. The anchor usually means hope, but on this particular mausoleum, it means that the gentleman buried there was a ship captain. So again, you have to sort of look at the person who's buried there and see what the interpretation is of the artwork on there. You'll see an inverted torch. That means a life has been extinguished. There's that obelisk I was talking about. You can always tell with the pointed pyramid top. And the Egyptians also did urns a lot. Now we use urns a lot for cremation. But the Egyptians, they used urns because they really felt that, especially if it was a high-powered person, that if they took their vital organs and kept them in oil, that when their spirit came back, they could be rejoined again. So you'll see that quite often in the cemetery. A lot of times there's a piece of fabric draped over it too, and that's called a pall, but it also signifies you don't need the material things in the next life, so you leave that behind. You don't need food, clothes, and shelter. Lambs are always pretty much indicative of a young child being buried there. And it's interesting, a lot of the, especially in the Victorian days, where it was very prevalent for children to die in early infancy, that families wouldn't even name the children. So you would just see infant, there wouldn't even be a name there. They would wait till the child's 1 year old to actually name them. Hands are all kinds, and the way the hands are positioned means all kinds of things. This one, there's actually a man and a woman's hands, because you could see the laciness of her blouse here, and the other is more of a tailored shirt. So, friendship, love. And mausoleums are these house-like structures. And these are quite prevalent also here on the grounds. The largest one we have is right up the hill here. It's a big Medina sandstone, and that has 30 crypts in it. And when it was built in the late 1800s, cost $100,000 because the interior is all Carrara marble with leaded glass windows, marble staircases, and crystal chandeliers. It's quite unbelievable. Whoever owns the mausoleum owns it. You have a deed to it like you would have a deed to a home. You would have the front door key, only you could get in. Like if you and I wanted to go in there and see that, we wouldn't be able to do that because we would have to get the family permission to do so. This particular one is the Walden Meyer Mausoleum. It's right there on the S curve before you get onto 198. And he was the father of meteorology. He actually started the Weather Bureau, started here in Buffalo, which I think is funny with our reputation for weather. And this is another mausoleum. This is called Blue Sky Mausoleum. And this was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright for Darwin Martin. And more people are coming here to Buffalo to see the Wright sites. And I'm finding they're coming here to Forest Lawn just to see this. It's quite interesting. Maybe some other time we can talk about that. A sarcophagus is an above-ground burial site. So rather than being entombed in the earth, it's a pretty much a box-like structure with a casket goes into. This is an old one from the Egyptian times. A cenotaph is a place where someone is remembered but not actually buried. Right up here on the wall we have this tree, and you'll see there's names on the little leaves there. This is for people that might have loved ones here locally, but they want a place to remember them locally, but they might have moved someplace else and are interred in the new cities that they made a life in. But we have quite a few of these. This was for our superintendent, and the family planted a tree in his name and then put the rock here, but he's actually buried in another part of the cemetery. And there's headstones and footstones. So you'll see, like in this one, this is, I believe, a footstone. This is Kleinhans, you know, Kleinhans Music Hall. So usually you'll see a large monument with the family name, and then what you do is you'll see the headstones or footstones of the individuals that are buried there. That's what the difference is. Now this is my favorite part of it. Unusual memorials. And again, the symbolism comes into this. This one is over by the lake, and right now it just has an addition on it. It's got a cat sculpture on the top of it, which is really neat. The woman whose family is going to be interred here wanted a statue of her pet cat. And so she had this artist do a sculpture of it, and that's now on the top of this, so it's going to be pretty easy to find. But what she did was interesting. The family that's going to be interred there, each one of them did a handprint in bronze, and that's inlaid into the monument itself, which I think is sort of cool. You know, everybody's doing genealogy these days, and I can just imagine their families 3 or 4 generations down the road coming back to search their family tree and actually be able to put their hands into a relative. I think it's quite moving itself. So each person that's laid to rest there, it is their own individual handprint. This guy was an actor. You can see he had an ego, so he even had a medallion of his face put up there. But we know he was an actor because on each side he has the comedy and the tragedy symbols right on his tombstone. You know, I see that kind of stuff, so I want to go back and say, what was this guy all about? You know, tell me a little bit about him. And that's when you find out stuff. And this, I think, is just sort of fun. This is just telling us and reminding us that time flies. So it goes by really quick. And the Victorians did a lot of really neat things. And if you're going to the cemetery, you'll probably see a couple of these, and you'll say, oh, from a distance, it looks like a petrified tree that, you know, had some major damage. But as you get closer, you realize this is a monument made out of granite. And a broken tree or a broken column tells us someone died young in their adulthood. And if you go closer, there's all kinds of ornamentation. There's ivy on this one. And the cool part of this one is you can see the book there that has information about the person that's laid to rest. And you can see how the bark looks just like the bark of a tree. But the fun part of this one is on the top. I don't know if you can see that, sort of towards the left, there's a little owl. His head's sort of sticking out here. So if you look really closely, the attention to detail, and nothing is alike. All of these are just one-of-a-kind pieces of art. And that's a broken column. You'll see some that are light blue in color. Matter of fact, there is a religious figure that has one of these. And those were made out of zinc. If you go up and you would go up and tap on it, it actually makes a hollow sound. And back at the turn of the century, there was places like Montgomery Ward and Sears where they had mail order catalogs, and it was popular for people in rural areas. And so they said, hey, you know, we're selling soap, we're selling bathtubs, we're selling toilet seats, we're selling all kinds of stuff. Why not sell grave markers also? But if they made it in granite, it'd be very tough to ship. So they made it out of a material called white bronze or zinc. And when they came here, they were gray in color. So they looked just like another piece of granite in the cemetery. But as time has gone on, they've oxidized to this light blue color. So, and they're very rare. They were only in fashion a few years. Matter of fact, a lot of cemeteries banned them because they didn't think they were going to last. But they look like they're brand new. The arch I spoke about, just like the front gate itself. Again, a reminder of transitioning. And we've got tons of buffaloes. People love, they're tough and proud in the cemetery. This particular lady, there was an art project here about 10 years ago called Heard About Buffalo. You might see some of the big painted buffaloes around town.
We have one at the college.
You have one at the college? And this woman, Patricia Capshaw-Wilkins, was one of the organizers. She was a patient at Roswell and became very interested in this fundraising project. And the summer that they were going to do the auction, she passed away before she could see the final results. So her family thought it was only fitting to have a buffalo on her gravesite. There's another one in granite. That's one of my favorite. You can see it's really close to the Main Street gate, and that's all done out of bronze. He looks so good in the snow. Now, can you figure out what this one might mean? What is the symbol before the... What does that look like? An I. The last name of this family is I, E-Y. So rather than put the alphabet spelling of it, they just did sort of a fun thing and put an I on there, on the marker itself. They must have been fun folks. And that's what I was telling you about, that it said that his face is put on the Sphinx itself. And then there was a great local artist at a gallery down on Franklin Street, Tony Sisti. And his marker, again, just sings what he did for his living. You've got the big artist palette, and then his actual signature is on the artist palette itself. And this is my favorite one. I stumbled across this literally one day. And it's this little rock. And if you notice, there's, well, on the top of it, is this shiny, almost looks like a magazine cover. And that's exactly what it is. In the far corner on the left is 25 cents. Then underneath it says Boy's Life. It says he was the hobby editor from 1937 to 1987. And his name is on there. He was the editor for Boy's Life magazine for 50 years. So that must have been his joy. But he also has this on his grave, on the bottom. This little choo-choo train coming out of the mountain that goes all around the rock, and the track is carved all the way to another little tunnel on the other side. And, you know, hobby editor, well, of course I said he loves trains. I do an art tour every Thursday, and this is on my art tour. And someone said, I I knew Mr. Wagner, and he was known for making, have you ever gone like to the History Museum and you've seen like a whole layout of a city with the train going through it? That's what he did. That was his hobby, creating these sort of dioramas. So even in his final resting place, everything that meant a lot to him is on this particular stone. And then, of course, we have Rick James here. I love his. It says, I've had it all, I've done it all, I've seen it all. It's all about love, God is love. That's his real name, James Ambrose Johnson. And you can see people leave things there all the time. That cemetery I was talking about in Paris, Père Lachaise, James Morrison from the Doors is buried there. And there's always tons of stuff around that also. Also, there's a forest lawn in Glendale, California, that has a lot of personalities. You know, they have that all the time. Matter of fact, when Michael Jackson passed away, his service was at the forest lawn in Glendale, and people were calling us all the time, asking about funeral arrangements. Oh, wrong side of the continent, sorry. But you can see, and that's all laser inscribed. A lot of the stuff we're doing today is laser inscribed. But I'm ending just by, one of the other things I want you to pay attention to as you're going through are the sayings on some of the stones, because it really might tell you a lot about the person that is laid to rest there, or about what the family thought about the person that is laid to rest there. And some are quite poignant. This one, the quality of a man's life is measured by how deeply he has touched the lives of others. This